Hello and welcome to this webinar on maximizing condo investment profitability. A bit about myself, my name is Randy McDonald. I'm the president of Heresy Condo Marketing. We're specialist investor-focused condo email marketing solutions since 2006. We've been involved in over 40 pre-construction Ontario condo projects, and we've published over 900 real estate articles online. So these are our latest webinars. The first you're watching now, which is on maximizing condo investment profitability. Second is a two-parter on Ontario's undersupplied condo markets. Part 1 is a video on Waterloo. Part 2 is on downtown Kingston. The third video is on Ontario's best and worst condo markets. And fourth is accelerate your condo portfolio's growth with refinancing. So these are all good information, due diligence, education videos, regardless of which projects you're interested in investing in. You'll learn more about best practices for real estate investing with any of these videos. So let's dive in and talk about maximizing condo investment profitability. So there are 4 key ingredients for buying right with investment property for minimizing your loss and maximizing your long-term return on investment, or ROI. And they are buying at the lowest purchase price, buying in an emerging property market, having constant monthly revenue with your rental property, and having maximum monthly income with your rental property as well. So we're going to get into all 4 of these in detail as we go along. So first, lowest purchase price. So it's the old stock market adage, buy low, sell high. It's the first rule of stock market investing, and it's conventional wisdom in stock market investing. It's much lesser known in wisdom in condo investing, but nonetheless applicable. Most people are buying only when a market is hot, when everyone else is going there. And in fact, like in most cases, if not all, you should be doing the exact opposite of the masses. So idea, you buy low and then you can sell high later. And then second is you want to be buying in an emerging property market. So you need to understand there are 4 phases of all real estate markets, and here's what they are in order. Each real estate market by neighborhood goes in these 4 phases in this order. A neighborhood starts out as an early market, and then it becomes an emerging market, and then it becomes an established market, and lastly transitions into a mature market. We're going to get into detail on each of these so you can understand any property that you look at. You'll be able to understand the areas, what phase of the what market phase it's in, and whether or not therefore you should buy in that area based on that. The best time to buy is when a property you're looking at is in an emerging market, and we'll illustrate that with examples as we go along. So it's very important to understand which one of the 4 phases of the city and given neighborhood within that city is in today. It's got a huge influence on your property's long-term profitability. A city's neighborhoods can each be in any of the 4 phases today. For instance, a neighborhood A, which is going to be an established market, and then the adjacent neighborhood next door, neighborhood B, can be an early market. If you actually take a look at a map of an entire city and all the neighborhoods in it, you're going to find that the neighborhoods are all over the map. Some of them are going to be early, some emerging, some established, some mature. It's really all over the map. So you really need to understand how this all works so that you can understand each area and therefore know which areas to buy properties and which ones to avoid. So savvy investors carefully look for and buy in emerging property markets, which are the most profitable markets. And so what I mean by emerging is it's a neighborhood whose area is moving from relative obscurity, which is an early market, to surging demand for local properties, which is an emerging market. So in a nutshell, an early market is off the radar, no one's looking at it. An emerging market is where it's starting to get on radar. A lot of people are looking at it, and the demand is there. Okay, so emerging property markets are imbalanced supply and demand markets with clear measurable proof that current property demand is considerably greater than current property supply for at least one type of property, for instance condos. Okay, so it's just basically there's the demand but the supply isn't there yet. Okay, and so that's what makes it an emerging property market. And so emerging property markets will gradually become established property markets in the coming years, becoming more balanced as property supply grows toward meeting property demand. For instance, new condo projects started, and there's less profit with established markets than emerging markets. So the best way to think of it, an established market is a mainstream market. It's when the people investors have typically figured it out and it's out there still early on. Um, but it's still well known. Now, as established property markets become more and more supplied through time, they become mature property markets in the coming years, once again becoming imbalanced as property supply grows beyond property demand. And there's less profit with mature markets than emerging or established markets. So, easy way to think of a mature market is when everyone knows about it, not just the average investor. Everyone knows about it, where it's it's on the radar, and it's basically saturated. So there are telltale signs. Property timing your condo investments by buying in emerging property markets before they become established or mature markets is very important for maximizing your long-term return on investment. So here is a really simple way of thinking of this, a rule of thumb. The earlier you buy, the less you pay, the more you get, and the more you'll earn long-term. Okay, that's basically the logic. And so the golden rule for buying in emerging markets is avoid buying too early or too late in any market. So really, timing is everything in buying real estate. You don't want to buy too early because it won't appreciate well. You don't want to buy too late because you pay too much for it and you won't make nearly as much money as if you buy an emerging market where you're buying just on time, just when the wave is starting to build up momentum, so to speak. So it's important to understand what early property markets are, because they are right before the emerging time, and so you want to understand the difference between an early and emerging market. So here's some information on early property markets. So early, you want to avoid buying in this phase. Early property markets have attractive low purchase price, but property's appreciation rate is stagnant due to currently balanced property supply and demand in the area, or little demand. Therefore, demand simply isn't strong enough yet for that area. It may take many years, even a decade or more, for early market properties to appreciate much in value due to lack of the market. Okay, so again, it's off radar. No one's looking there at this point, and therefore the demand isn't there as well. So here is some early market examples. These are the keys to understanding early markets. So it's typically an undesirable location in a city. So for instance, take a look at the rundown neighborhoods in your area, especially the ones that are beside or near desirable ones. Two examples, Parkdale and Stonegate. Parkdale is in Toronto West, Stonegate is a little bit further west of Toronto, sort of into the Etobicoke area. And so, Parkdale is just one of these areas that's just never really come along much. You can see quite a difference between it and its nearby areas, such as Roncesvalles, which is a gentrified area, and the Queen West area as well, and King West, all nearby. Stonegate has a gazillion old rental properties, built 60, 70 years ago, many of which are just dilapidated, low income, very little commercial activity in the area in terms of stores. So, just basically both these are undesirable areas that just have not sort of picked up momentum and started turning a corner into becoming gentrified. You also see early market examples, undesirable location in formerly manufacturing-based cities. These are typically cities that are in what's called the Rust Belt of the northeastern United States. All of these states that had manufacturing-heavy bases that have now largely gone away. Buffalo is our closest example. I was actually going to see a property there last summer, and driving through the neighborhoods, it was quite alarming compared to Toronto, just to see the difference. About every third house was boarded up or abandoned, or just in a very dilapidated state. And in fact, I even saw one house that had the front big sort of main window smashed. It was just gone, and there was a big piece of plywood and had the number 16 spray painted on the front, and that was the address of the house. So same thing with Detroit. Detroit is even worse. And back in the 1930s, it was actually the most fastest growing city in the United States back then, no doubt because of the automotive industry. Now, because the automotive industry has changed so much and gone overseas, there's much less in terms of industry there. It's all gone away largely. 50% of their population has been lost in the last 30 years. I know all this information because of interesting documentary on Netflix called Detropia, where they really show what Detroit is like, and it's a very sad situation. You know, houses are just selling for nothing and so forth. On the other hand, you have areas like the downtown Toronto waterfront and Hamilton, which are changing. They're being, they're not just trying to cling to the past and have just been abandoned. They're actually trying to transition into more of a service-based economy, more technology-based economy, and so these are the areas that are kind of primed to become emerging markets, because they are on the upswing. Property is still really cheap there and starting to get attention. I'll talk about the downtown Toronto waterfront in a minute as a prime example of that. Another early market example is where you have these underdeveloped areas that just have never been developed at all. And so these are the ones that are beyond the edge of the suburban sprawl. Like, for example, Markham around 2003, that's when I lived there, right at Markham Road and Steeles. And at that time, that was pretty much the edge of much of the development in northeastern part of the GTA. I remember if you could walk down the street along Steeles, just east of Markham Road, you were literally in farm country within about a 10-minute walk, and it was just very dark around there. It's like country dark, I call it, where it's just, not nearly as much, and very little, very little commercial around there, very little stores. I remember the nearest movie store was about like a 10-minute drive away. So areas like this, there's not much to restrict the supply, and there's not as much demand, and everything's kind of cookie cutter around there. So you want to avoid these areas because they would take a long time to appreciate. Now, of course, things are different in Markham. It's much more developed, but back then, buying right on the edge of the suburban sprawl wouldn't have been the way to go. That would have been an early market. So these are the key questions to ask with any early market to understand how close it is to becoming an emerging market. Will it likely gentrify in the next 5 or 10 years or ever? You take a look at a place like Detroit, it's pretty much a lost cause, in Buffalo the same way. Whereas you look at Hamilton, the reason that is just sort of like our Buffalo here in Toronto, but the thing with Hamilton is because of its proximity to Toronto, yes, it is likely gentrifying in the next 5 to 10 years more and more, because of its proximity to Toronto. People are just getting sick of the traffic in Toronto, and the high prices, the house prices and insanity there, and so more people are moving there, and so that's one of the reasons why it will gentrify over time. It already is underway. Second question, is it near or ideally adjacent to gentrified neighborhoods? So for instance, a good bet is the Parkdale neighborhood in Toronto, because like I mentioned, that neighborhood is surrounded by gentrified neighborhoods. It's near the Roncesvalles neighborhood to the north, Queen West to the east, and King West down to sort of the south and southeast area. Just it's surrounded by that. So as properties get too expensive in those areas, naturally people going from Toronto to Hamilton, people that don't want to, are looking around those areas and say, hey, let's just move into Parkdale because the land is cheaper there. Developers are saying that, and and then that's the one that's most likely to become gentrified next, is the one that's surrounded by it. So you also want to look at an area and see if there's any major new retail chain stores opening. For instance, there are a Starbucks or a McDonald's. It's well known that when a McDonald's or Starbucks, it comes up, a lot of other stores cluster around them because they bring so much business. These big companies do a lot of due diligence before putting a new store in an area, and so you can know that if Starbucks is moving there or McDonald's is moving there, it's a good bet that the tide is turning in that area, and it's an area you want to invest in as well as these chains. You want to look and see if there's any new transportation projects underway in the area, for instance, highway or public transit, and underline underway, because you want to avoid an area where they're saying that they're going to be putting in new highways or public transportation, but then it never happens. Example was about 15 years ago, back in around year 2000, a friend of mine was all happy that she lived right beside Square One, and they had just announced that they were extending the subway line out to Mississauga, out to Square One. Well, we can see that just simply never happened. Whereas other projects such as that may or may not happen, you want to make sure that you want to see that the likelihood of it happening The latest one that's being touted is the Eglinton West line that will go, right across Eglinton. So, you want to make sure that if it's something that seems that it might not happen, wait until there's actually shovels in the ground and it's actually happening before investing in that area. A few more key questions to ask within any early market. How well are the area's first new condo or townhome projects selling? So if you see an area like, for instance, Parkdale, if you see a new project crop up there, you want to go into the sales center a month or two after it's on sale and ask them, how many units are left? How much of the building is sold? And if it's selling really fast, then that's a good time to buy in that project or in the next project. That's the time. Another thing is, are there any new master plan communities in the area? Typically in an early market, when there's lots of land available, relatively cheap to developers, a developer will buy up a big tract of land and make what's known as a master plan community, where they have planned a big giant area from the get-go, and so it's well balanced in terms of its residential, its retail, it's all of the things, recreation, that make an area desirable and balanced. And so those are the areas you want to invest in especially. The other thing too, it's a very important, very key factor if it's there, is will government dollars help gentrify the area? If so, how much money will the government spend? The more a government is putting in it to revitalize an area, the more that the private sector will be getting behind it, and there's just more momentum that's given. And so I want to give a prime example of that government money to talk about downtown Toronto's waterfront area and certain parts of it as being early markets, but definitely you want to look out for, and will be great investment, and you'll see why here. So let's talk about the downtown Toronto waterfront. So there's a huge amount of land in the waterfront southeast end. It covers almost 2,000 acres. Okay, and so in the past, this area has been used a lot for industrial. It's manufacturing. There's big ship ports for these giant freighters that come in. There's also a ton of vacant, unused land around there, and so there's been a new initiative in recent years by the City of Toronto. It's called Waterfront Toronto. It's the City of Toronto's 25-year initiative to revitalize the southeastern part of downtown Toronto's waterfront. Okay, and you can actually check that out at waterfronttoronto.ca to get some of the information. So to give you a sense of how big this project is, this is a view of the downtown core. This is the downtown sort of inner harbor area right here. Here, of course, is the Billy Bishop Airport. And so this is the downtown core, right where my cursor is right now. Now, the area that I'm talking about that's benefiting from this waterfront development is this area right here where my cursor is. Okay, so this is a massive tract of land, and very close to the downtown core, yet very underutilized at the moment. Okay, it will be a long time before it is, before there are condos sitting on it, and it's definitely in the early market phase. But this is an area that you definitely want to keep your eye on. I would be lining up day one, the first project that goes up in this area, I would be lining up. So to give you a sense of this area in terms of the market, so the central waterfront, it's been there for a long time. It's definitely in the mature market phase. Okay, the East Bay front here, these are some of the this is some of the area that's west of Yonge on the Queens Quay area that has seen quite a bit of development in recent years. You're seeing the Sugar Beach is down there. You're seeing the Chorus Entertainment buildings down there. Project I was involved in a couple of years ago called Aquilina, and so a whole bunch of projects have cropped up in this area. So this is kind of becoming sort of an emerging to early market in this East Bay front. Same thing in the West Don lands. Now the area to really watch, you really want to watch, because these are going to be hot as hell, are going to be these lower Don lands and Portlands areas. Okay, so to put it in perspective, this is these areas right here. So if you're coming along the Gardner Expressway, coming eastbound along here, this is basically where this is where the Gardner is. These are all these areas. So this is the West Donlands, right where my cursor is, and these are the Portland areas right here. So this is these areas that are going to benefit hugely from this Toronto waterfront project. And you can see that there's just not much going on there. Vacant land, industrial, etc. Okay, so now this is a quote from the Waterfront Toronto Project's website to give you a sense of how massive this revitalization is and why it will make such a great investment in years to come for anyone buying condos there or townhomes. The revitalization of Toronto's waterfront is the largest urban redevelopment project currently underway in North America and is one of the largest waterfront revitalizations ever undertaken in the world. On a world scale, Toronto's waterfront revitalization is almost unequaled in size. It's larger than Lower Manhattan and 4 times the size of Monaco. To get a sense of its proportions on a local scale, the total area being redeveloped is 800 hectares, 1,977 acres, which translates to an area roughly the size of Toronto's current downtown core. So really what we're going to be getting here is almost an eastern part. It's almost like Toronto is not going to be just the downtown core with Yonge Street as its main artery. We're going to be basically having, over time, a new sort of downtown core. This is going to be like Toronto sort of downtown east that's going to be cropping up and is going to be gentrifying. But this, I guarantee, over time is going to become huge. Okay, and here are some numbers to put this in perspective to see how much is being going into this area and how much the government is behind it. So the total cost estimated by the City of Toronto of the area's revitalization is $12 billion to revitalize this area, everything all in. $5 billion of it is coming from federal, provincial, and municipal City of Toronto government money, and $7 billion is in private sector investment. So you can see how important it is when a government is this much behind it. The private sector typically gets way behind it as well, and there's some massive synergies when you have both the government, the public, and the private sectors contributing to an area. And so again, I would be buying this. Now is not time to buy. This is an early market because it's still early on. There's nothing in the area. But any of these areas in the lower Dawnlands, and especially these Portlands that are going to all be sort of waterfront, and going to have like terrific views. If you've ever been to the Docks nightclub on the waterfront here, it's now known as Cabana. You get these really, really great views of the downtown Toronto. So just imagine having a condo right here. You're going to have a view of downtown Toronto, way over Lake Ontario. You're going to have one of Center Island. You're going to have these spectacular views and a lot of conservation land around here, and still yet very near the downtown Toronto core as well, just right beside it, in fact. Okay. Again, this is what the area looks like today in the West Dawnlands and Portlands area. This is what it's going to look like in the coming years when it's developed as part of this giant master plan community. Okay, and it's going to be called Villiers Island. This is the revitalized Lower Dawnlands and Portlands there. So just remember that Villiers Island. It's going to encompass 22 city blocks of new developments. There's going to be 100 acres of parkland. And best of all for investors, there's going to be a new TTC LRT, light rapid transit line, connecting this island to the downtown Toronto core. Okay, so very, very sexy project. This is what it's going to look like. These are the artist renderings directly from this Waterfront Toronto website. Okay, so that's what this downtown Toronto is going to look like. You can see the CN Tower in the distance there. Okay, you can see there's going to be a lot of parkland that they're just going to keep and you know, just not overbuild. You know, it's going to be great for people that love the outdoors, you know, kayaking and things like this. They're going to keep this channel there as well where the ships previously came in. You know, again, tons of great things happening in this area. Imagine just being this down to the downtown, close to the downtown core, and yet having this much parkland to walk around. It's going to be insane, this area investing. And there is your LRT going between the downtown Toronto, connecting up with Union Station. And so, you know, if I was to be investing, this would be the bar none place to be investing in the coming years. The earlier you can get in, the better. It has got all of the check marks for a great place to invest in an emerging market when it becomes and when it's available. So let's talk about mature property markets, okay, which is going to be like the complete opposite of this. Okay, so you want to avoid, again, buying too late. So be wary of mature property markets, which are the hot areas. Everyone knows about them, with many years of consistently proven and obvious high market demand and lots of supply. For instance, downtown Toronto. You know, again, that's why Another reason why the Portlands and the West Don Lands area are going to be so great, because there's going to be a ton of spillover from people that want to be in the near the downtown core. They work down there, but they want to be near there, but it's too expensive in the downtown core, and so there's going to be a ton of spillover from those people into those Portlands and Don Lands area, and so mature condo markets are saturated commodity markets. Think of cookie cutter, meaning their local resale market is increasingly competitive, mostly on price, because everything is the same, and so it hurts the capital appreciation growth and long-term return on investment. So here's a telltale sign of a mature property market. It's got they're very imbalanced neighborhoods. There's loads of new high-rise condos clustered together and relatively little commercial development or recreational resources. This is one of the problems that arises when you don't have master plan communities, that the developers are just coming in, planting their flag with their building, and that's it, with not much consideration for the area. And so to illustrate that, I've actually done a Toronto case study on the 4 phases of the condo markets in another webinar. It's on Ontario's best and worst condo markets. And here I do a case study on actually the West End's waterfront condo market, which is actually in the mature market phase. So it is actually completely at the other end of the spectrum of the Don Lands and Portlands area is today. The Toronto West Humber Bay Shores area is in the mature market phase today. And this is what you've got down there. Okay, this is right at the corner of Parklawn and Lakeshore in this area, and it's just it's just a total condo canyon. Okay, and so if you buy in a mature market, the competitor buildings increasingly have an impact on your unit's monthly rental income and your long-term capital appreciation. There's just tons more appreciation. There's just tons more competition, and the problem is with buying too late is that they're expensive from day one. Due to the high demand in mature markets, the land acquisition costs are very high for developers in such areas, and then they just pass them on to the investors. An area like this is like that. An example of this, is the Mervish family and the annex in downtown Toronto. Okay, so everyone's heard of the Honest Ed's building, this retail store. It's right at the corner of Bathurst and Bloor in downtown Toronto. And so the Mervish family has owned this property for many, many years. And so what they actually did is, over the years, they bought up the properties in the block beside it, on the Markham Street, sort of bisects the block between Honest Ed's and the block next to it. And so for years they were just buying up the properties on that block west of Markham Street and the houses that were south of that as well, and they just bought them up as they became available, outbid everyone, and they just amassed a huge tract of land that they just recently sold. I know this because I know an owner of a karaoke bar that's on that block, and they have to be out by the end of 2016 because the block is being torn down. And so the Mervish family sold these 2 blocks to a condo developer, a luxury condo developer actually, for $300 million. Okay, so you can see how much they would have to charge for these properties to make them profitable. They would have to charge an arm and a leg because they had to pay so much money. $300 million for 2 blocks at a really prime location, right beside the Bathurst subway station, right where U of T is, right on the Bloor line, etc. So the result is developers charge investors much more for condos built in established or mature markets than emerging markets. Okay, again, the problem is that there's a highest purchase price with these mature markets. So that means you're paying more interest on the mortgage over the term, okay, and that means higher property taxes as well because the property is worth more, it's appraised higher, and you're also getting higher monthly condo fees. Okay, so these are all the perils of buying in the mature market that's saturated. So the result for investors, mature market condos with high pre-construction purchase prices typically have break-even or even negative operating cash flow. Okay, in other words, monthly condo expenses exceed the monthly rental revenue for many years. The only real way to avoid this is by paying a much higher down payment. I heard one developer say, we recommend our people be paying 35% down payment. Well, when you're doing that sort of thing, so that you can get the more positive cash flow, that kind of defeats the purpose a bit of buying real estate, because the whole name of the game with real estate is leverage, using other people's money rather than putting down a huge chunk of money. So generally you want to avoid buying negative cash flow condos, especially if the financial analysis reveals the bad cash flow situation lasts long term. unless there are very compelling reasons to buy. For instance, the property supply is restricted long term in an area, okay, where new properties can't be built for whatever reason. And so again, the point is, would you buy a stock with no dividends paid or was losing money? Because that's the value proposition of buying a condo in a mature market. You're buying an investment that's losing money from day one. So would you buy that with a stock? Well, of course you would. So why would you do it with a condo? So I want to share some insight from condo developer and downtown Toronto condo brokerage owner Brad Lamb. He's very likely Toronto's foremost authority on the Toronto condo market. This guy really knows his stuff. He's been in the real estate business for about 30 years. There's one of his signs there, one of his kit sheet billboards. It's been in downtown Toronto. And it just has a great deal of market insight. And so this is a quote from his May 2016 from his brokerage, Brad J. Lamb Realty. Toronto is becoming an expensive international city like London, Hong Kong, New York, Paris, etc. Local, federal, and provincial levies and taxes continue to drive development costs higher. This combination of fees and taxes currently eats up approximately 25% of the cost of new high-rise housing in Toronto. It's only going to rise. Green technologies and other new building code initiatives like fully sprinkled buildings and groundwater taxes are adding additional costs to high-rise housing. Currently, the developer's cost of delivering a high-rise in Toronto before profit is edging close to $600 per square foot. In some areas, it is closer to $800 per square foot. Keep in mind that this is the cost of creating high-rise homes. New sale prices must now commonly be $700 to $900 per square foot to allow for reasonable developer profit. Okay, so Lamb is talking about downtown Toronto because this is where he is heavily developing in condo projects. So to put this in perspective, this is what the costs are for a downtown Toronto developer to build a one-bedroom unit at 566 square feet. So at $600 per square foot, there's your cost, $339. $700 per square foot, there's his cost, $396, $200. Okay, so very expensive just for the developer to be developing. And so here is the sale price for that same 566 square foot one bedroom unit. Okay, so if the developer make a profit, they've got to be selling for close to $400,000, even as high as $500,000 for just a fairly small 566 square foot condo. Okay, so this really puts it in perspective. You pay that much for a property to begin with. Good luck is all I can say. So here's a little bit of another case study. This is a new Toronto West 500 unit condo in the Stonegate neighborhood, which is Toronto West, which is just a little bit west of High Park, pretty much the border between Etobicoke and Toronto. This was launched in early May 2016, and its current post-launch pricing starts at $292,990 for one bedroom. So that works out to $518 per square foot and 53.5 cents per square foot for the monthly condo fees. No tenant guarantee. So you can see this is quite a bit less because, again, you're moving outside the downtown Toronto core, so the prices are cheaper. You get away from the major activity and the price per square foot. But the problem with the Stonegate area is it's still in the early market phase. This is an area that's really just dominated by rental buildings. There's a ton of 1950s rental building that are all rent controlled because of their age, and it's very competitive local rental market. There's at least 50, 60 of these 4-story brownstone buildings with about 25 units each. So there is a ton of inventory on the market here, okay, that are all often being refurbished so that they when they're being moved out, that the property management company comes in and makes them, gives them new kitchens, gives them new bathrooms so that they resemble condos. And so these one bedrooms in these old buildings are currently rent for $1,000 to $1,100 a month, okay, for a one bedroom in this area. Okay, so have a brand new condo in this area. Here's what the pricing looks like in the mortgage details. Okay, so your total purchase price with parking is $317,990. Okay, and there's all the financial information. So taking that all into account, to put that in perspective, here's the 3 monthly cash flow situations. If you're an investor and you've bought one of these, and if you're getting your these are 3 different rental situations. So let's look at if you have $1,800 per month rent paid by a tenant. Second is if you have $1,700 a month paid. Third is $1,600 a month paid. Okay, so using a long-term cash flow analysis, this was what it looks like. Okay, so This far left column here is your monthly rental revenue, okay? And you can pause this if you like and review it. But really what I want you to focus on is this column right here, okay? Now this is your total net operating income per year. So this is your profit at the end of the year, your revenue minus your expenses. And so you see here, any of these red areas, means where you're losing money. So even if you were able to get $1,800 a month for this property, based on these projections, you're actually going to be losing money on a monthly basis for the first 5 years, and you're not even going to be sort of in the black as far as monthly cash flow until year 11. Okay, so that's at $1,800 a month. Okay, now it gets even worse. With just $100 less in monthly revenue, this is what it looks like. Okay, it gets just more red, means more doom and gloom. Okay, so $100 less, that means you're not going to you're not going to have monthly profit until the 10th year, and not going to break even until the 16th year, and even another $100 less, which is very conceivable because it is very competitive in this area. You can see here that the cash flow situation, you're only going to be making a measly $26,000 over a 25-year term with this property. So very poor cash flow situation based on these projections. Okay, you're going to be losing money for the first 12 years. Can you imagine buying a stock and losing it for 12 years? You would have sold it way before that. Okay, so you only want to buy a pre-construction condo that earns positive monthly income from day one of occupancy. You don't want to be having the situations where you're relying on the capital appreciation to happen because you're losing money on a monthly basis. So this is kind of the flip side of that earlier sort of golden rule. The later you buy, the more you pay, the less you get, and the less you'll earn long term. Okay, so in established and especially mature condo markets, you really need to understand that given condos' exact location and building amenities in relation to other condos. If you're going to buy in them, you got to know how they compare. The best thing to do is just avoid mature markets altogether. Despite what the media says, real estate always has been and always will be a very localized market. Anytime you see an article that's talking about what's happening to the Canadian housing market, ignore it. It's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. There are such a hodgepodge of markets all over the whole entire country, by province, by region, by city, by neighborhood. It is meaningless to put things on such a macro level. Real estate is all about location and neighborhood. So it begs the question here, how do you buy at the right time? What are the key ingredients for knowing when to buy, where it's not too early, not too late? Price is still low. Property price is low relative to established property markets. The investor masses don't see it yet, so little investor end user demand, therefore price is still low. And the thing with this is that the developer can afford to leave more money on the table for investors due to cheaper land costs. This is the key thing. The earlier the market is, cheap land, and so the developer can pass this sort of along to investors, and everyone makes more money. Another telltale sign of emerging property market is they'll have the best location in a neighborhood. Since the land costs are cheap in emerging markets with lots of availability, developers can afford to be very choosy and pick the very best AAA location within a given neighborhood for their project. In that other webinar on Ontario's best and worst condo projects, I talk about the Humber Bay Shores, Toronto West waterfront market, and the very first building in that area was the Palace Pier building, and it is the very best location in the area. It's right beside the Humber River. It's on the very corner of the Humber River and Lake Ontario, so it's got a great view of Lake Ontario, of the river going north, High Park, downtown Toronto. It is the primo location. So this is another advantage of buying an emerging market, is that you're typically getting the very best location when it's bought very early. So that helps well for its appreciation over time. You want to be looking for areas that have growing property demand. So you must see clear proof in early markets areas now experiencing major growth in demand. And the proof of that is the neighborhood's very first 1 to 2 condo projects have sold fast. To talk about that Humber Bay Shores area, the first building that I'm talking about, the Palace Pier, that didn't sell well. It took 13 years between that and the second building to be built, and only then did momentum start to pick up. Okay, so any area you're considering where you think it's an early market and you want to see if it's transitioning to an emerging market, go into the sales center and ask them, a couple months in, how well is it sold? If it's sold out, then that's a great time to be buying in the very next project that comes to that area. If it's got stagnant sales and it's not selling, you want to think twice about it, because that means the demand is not there yet. Okay. So growing property demand, of course, condos often first type of property seeing heightened demand in emerging market because they're the most affordable. So condos are really kind of the barometer for an area's growth, especially these areas like in downtown Toronto where the land is relatively expensive anyway. So the developers are just not putting up housing projects. It's too expensive. The houses would be astronomical in price to do that. So property supply restrictions, this is another. Best emerging markets are where the property shortage will remain long-term or permanently due to barriers to entry for new properties. For instance, there's a thing that's called the Ontario Places to Grow Act, and what this is this is a map of the Golden Horseshoe. All these green areas you see are all protected conservation areas that the Ontario government is saying to developers, you can't develop in these areas. We want you to be building up rather than across the land. It saves us a lot of tax dollars on not having to spend as much on infrastructure. The developer has to pay more for the infrastructure when it's a condo building and so forth. So the Ontario Places to Grow Act is something that's really causing a lot of the condo boom in the Toronto area, because it's forcing developers to use the land more efficiently and causing, therefore, condos to be a more attractive investment for developers and everyone involved. So now the third factor of maximizing your condo investment profitability is having constant monthly revenue. It's imperative to have the best tenants from day one for maximizing your rental revenue. And minimizing any form of loss, vacancies, non-paying tenants, damage. Okay, and the way to do this is to work with local tenant management professionals, ideally developer or realtor provider referred, for getting the highest paying, most reliable tenants. For instance, I've spoken with a brokerage in downtown Toronto, Remax Condos Plus, and because they do so much condos in the downtown area, that they are formally allied with a property management company that will provide a tenant for their investor clients, should they be wishing to use it, not just to flip it, but to have it as a long-term rental property with a tenant. Okay, and you want to have that rather than relying on an individual realtor or yourself, where you might wind up getting a tenant that isn't everything that they could be. Okay. So tenant management professionals can package any condo project as a truly turnkey, hands-off passive investment, which makes it best for the investor because they don't have to do anything. It's all handled by professionals. So they provide top-paying, reliable tenant, full unit furnishings in many cases, and tenant management, think superintendent, for helping ensure great high-paying tenants stay long-term. Okay, so the tenant management company, they're the ideal complement to the property management company all condos have for handling the common elements of the condo building for your monthly condo fees paid for. Okay, so having both tenant and property management ensures every aspect of your condo investment is properly managed and cared for long-term by professionals. Okay, makes it a more attractive investment as a result that you could pass along to an investor, and therefore helps the property appreciation value. Lastly, maximum monthly income. This is another side. This is a definite key benefit of buying an emerging market. Is you buy condos in areas with proven high demand for rentals and solid numbers to prove it. Taking a look at CMHC, for instance, high rental demand translates to higher rents paid, and that translates into higher property value ultimately. So this is the formula for maximum monthly income: low purchase price in emerging real estate market, plus progressively higher rents paid, equals continually higher monthly income for rental units over the long term. So you're making money on a monthly basis. You've got faster equity growth through faster mortgage pay down, and you've got a greater capital appreciation rate. And you particularly want to focus on the last one because that one is far and away the most important factor in an investment's ROI. So these four ingredients, again, lowest purchase price, emerging property market, constant monthly revenue, and maximum monthly income. I want to introduce you to a new student condo project that meets all four of these investment criteria, and it's called The Capital. It's located in downtown Kingston, and it's by a developer named Innate Developments. They are a condo and townhouse specialist with 20 years experience developing student housing in undersupplied areas outside the Greater Toronto Area, including Waterloo and downtown Kingston. There is what the Capital building is going to look like when it's finished in 2018. And so here's how the capital fits these four ingredients for buying right. It's got the lowest purchase price. The capital's price is only for one bedroom only start at $239,900. That's $50,000 to $150,000 less than Toronto. Second, it's in downtown Kingston is currently an emerging property market. The condo rental vacancy rate in downtown Kingston is currently very low, 0.3%, proving the area is very undersupplied relative to demand. Another thing is that this building is actually the first high-rise condo in the downtown Kingston area, so this is why it's an emerging market. Plus, the capital's prime AAA location near Queen's University with a 98 out of 100 walk score today really means that it is locked and ready to go. Walk score, in case you don't know, is an area's amenities rating. The higher the better. So it means that there's a ton of amenities in this area. It's a great location, but yet highly undersupplied. The first high-rise in this building, first high-rise in this area. Third, constant monthly revenue. So Innate Developments offers investors a turnkey, hands-off investment for Toronto area investors who don't live near Kingston, and it's with a guaranteed tenant at a guaranteed monthly rate that they offer for the condo for the first year, plus all property and tenant management and unit furnishing selected, delivered, and installed. You know, students this particularly appeals to because they're there temporarily, so they like to have their units furnished. So Innate Developments handles everything to do with this. And lastly, it fits the maximum monthly income because it's got the low purchase price and the high rental demand. That means that there's more rents that are paid for buildings like this, and so the capital has a much better positive monthly income situation for rent than typical Toronto GTA condos. Okay, so we've got a few more tools here that you can check out to do due diligence to see if something that you would like to invest in. These due diligence resources are a video on the Kingston condo market. It's called Ontario's Undersupplied Condo Markets with a focus on downtown Kingston. We've also got a detailed return on investment info on the capital in this video financial analysis for the capital condos, where we're talking about the monthly income situation, what the property looks like in terms of its capital appreciation over the long term. Definitely some detailed projections based on some sound market data of the Kingston area. And you can also get details on Innate Development's stellar track record in doing this. They've already done it in developing student condos in emerging market, and they did it in Waterloo. So there's a second video that you can watch to see how Innate Developments has a knack for getting in early to a market and exploiting an opportunity, and where everyone wins. And they did that with Waterloo, and this video goes into detail about how that was done. So for access to these and more investor education videos and pricing, floor plans, and so forth, register for the Capital Condos on the page you'll be directed next in a few moments and when this video ends. So if you'd like any additional information, you can reach out to me. My name is Randy McDonald again. There's my contact info. And thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the landing page, the registration page for the Capital.